The hallway was dim, and I had no intention of listening. I was on my way to get my jacket when Brad's voice came through the half-open door of the living room, relaxed, as if talking about something completely ordinary. I told my dad I was giving the car to Ray. He doesn't really need it that much anymore anyway. I stopped. I did not go into the room. I did not say anything. I just stood in that hallway and listened to my own silence. That sentence was not about the car. It was about how my son sees me, a man whose needs have diminished, To understand that hallway, you have to understand 38 years with a municipal utility company in Indianapolis. Early shifts, the smell of electrical components and transformer oil, the knowledge that everything you have is worth exactly what it cost you to earn it. Every dollar, I knew where it came from. The house Carol and I built in stages, without shortcuts. The Fusion I bought in cash in 2019. A dark blue Ford, 5 years old. The first thing in my life I bought thinking only of myself. I drove Carol to her sisters in it every Thanksgiving, took the grandchildren to their baseball games. There was if this is the first time you are watching this channel, welcome. Stay until the end. This story is not about a car. It is about the moment a man realizes his own family sees him as a resource to be used, not as a person with the right to his own belongings and decisions. Subscribe and leave a comment telling me where you are watching from. I answer everyone. This is a story about a father who worked his whole life, a son who believed he was helping, and a cold moment of clarity that changed everything quietly. No shouting, no drama, with papers at a lawyer's. My name is Gerald Hoffman. I am 68 years old, electrical engineer, 38 years the same utility company, the same shifts. I am not a man who complains. I learned early that what you have is treated with care, that nothing is taken for granted, and that what you say has to line up with what you do. Carol has been beside me for 35 years, a warm and steady woman who is witness to all of this. Brad is our only son. He married Wendy, who is a good woman, and Wendy's father, Ray Greer, is a man I met at the wedding and knew immediately was I am not a man who talks much about himself, never was. Carol says I process everything from the inside, like a dam filling while nobody watches the level rise. She is right. 38 years of technical work teach you that the installation that does not announce its failure is the most dangerous one. I learned to read materials, and also, with time, to read people. Ray Greer was a material I recognized from the first handshake at the wedding reception, not because he was simply bad, but because he was comfortable in a specific way that most people do not detect until it is already too late to address without a confrontation. This house is not just walls and a roof. Carol and I started it the year Brad was born, with what we had. The Fusion I bought in cash in 2019, after years of setting money aside quietly. The first time in my life I bought something thinking exclusively of myself. I maintained it myself, washed it myself, knew the condition of every part. It was the only indulgence I had allowed myself in decades of work, and nobody had given it to me. For a man who worked 38 years to have something of his own, that means more than can be explained to someone who has not lived it. In the Fusion, I drove Carol to her sisters every Thanksgiving, and on the way back, she put her elbow on the window frame, the way she did when we were dating in a different car that no longer exists. In that same car, I took the grandchildren to their Saturday baseball games, and they always wanted to sit alone in the back seat. There was a classic rock CD in the glove compartment. I put there the day I bought it and never removed. It was not an extravagant car. It was simply mine. Completely, documentably, paid in cash mine. And for a man who worked to have something of his own, that means everything. Ray Greer never bought anything in cash in his life. I know this not from gossip, but from what he himself said at family dinners with inverted pride. He arrived at the first family cookout with a new phone that Brad had helped pay for. I said nothing. He arrived the second time in the Fusion that Brad had lent him for a weekend without asking me. I found out when I went to the garage and the car was gone. He brought it back with a new scrape and cigarette smell in the upholstery. I said nothing then either, but I registered everything. I was keeping track without knowing it. There was a cookout where Ray talked about the car with the easy familiarity of a partial owner, comparing it, evaluating it, as if it almost belonged to the family. Afterward, Brad told me he had lent Ray the Fusion for a week because Ray's truck was in the shop. He did not ask. He informed me. He took the keys without waiting for a response. That was the first time I thought concretely. This has a pattern. Not a single favor. A direction. And directions that go uncorrected become roads. Roads become habits, and habits become assumed rights that nobody ever actually granted to anyone. The day of the hallway was not the first time something felt wrong. It was the day I heard it said without a filter, the way someone speaks the truth when they believe nobody is listening. He doesn't really need it that much anymore anyway. That sentence had layers. Brad considered the car his to give. He considered my needs to have diminished, and neither assumption required my voice or my permission. I stood in the hallway for a full minute. Then I went to the garage, sat on the workbench, and stayed there until the light on the concrete floor shifted with the afternoon. I thought about 38 years and what they deserved. Leave me a comment right now. Have you ever been somewhere and heard something you were not meant to hear? Something that told you exactly what you needed to know? It does not have to be about a car. It can be about your house, your money, your time, how the people who should know you best actually see you. I ask because many watching this recognize that feeling. Not the anger that boils over, but that cold and quiet clarity that tells you something has to change. My response was not a fight or a scene. It was going down to the garage, sitting on a workbench, and that night I did not sleep well. Carol noticed but did not ask. She knows when not to ask, and that is one of her finest qualities. I told her only, "We need to talk to Brad about some things." She nodded without asking for details. She knew the tone. The next morning I called Dennis, a retired attorney in Carmel, Indiana. I said I needed a contact active in estate and property law, and that it was urgent without being an emergency. He gave me a name. That same day I called Ray Greer in a flat voice. "Ray, I am going to need the Fusion back by." The attorney's office was on the second floor of an older building downtown. Orderly, files arranged by date, the smell of old paper that I liked immediately. I described the situation briefly and precisely, the way you describe a technical problem, without emotion, with the facts in order. The attorney listened and said, "So you want to protect the vehicle from unauthorized use and revisit the will?" I said yes. In less than a week, I had a limited power of attorney for the fusion, establishing that no other person may operate it without my written authorization. I also had the draft of a revised will. Brad's share was. With the attorney's guidance, I reviewed the full picture: the house, the savings, the beneficiaries on my retirement account. Nothing was poorly structured, but everything reflected an assumption that was no longer valid, that Brad was a responsible steward of what I had built. The hallway contradicted it. I changed what needed changing, not with anger and not to punish, but with the same logic I used in 38 years whenever I found an installation that no longer matched the real conditions of the system. When conditions change, the design gets updated. Not doing that is the error of the engineer, who ignores the evidence in front of him. While I was at the attorney's office, Brad was living his week, with no suspicion that anything had shifted. I know because Carol told me he mentioned, almost in passing, that maybe his dad would sell the Fusion to Ray at a good price, since Dad doesn't really drive it every day. I heard that and noticed something final. Brad did not consider the question of who owns the car to be an open question. In his mind, it was a family resource that moved toward whoever needed it. I was a source in that family, not a person whose voice counted in the decisions that directly concerned and affected me. Ray called Brad on Tuesday to say his dad had asked for the car back. Brad called me confused. I answered and said only, "I need the car. It is in the garage, and we need to talk." The conversation happened Saturday morning at the kitchen table, just the two of us. Carol had gone to the farmer's market. She simply sensed the moment required space. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse him. I placed 2 sheets of paper on the table and let him read. The limited power of attorney and the summary of changes to the will. I said, "I heard you and Brad's face move through stages I watched without changing mine. Confusion, the impulse to explain himself, then something that looked like genuine shame. Not performed, but quiet. He said it was not his intention, that he only wanted to help Ray out, that he thought I would not mind." I listened to all of it without interrupting. Then I said one thing. I did not say your intention was bad. I said you did not ask. And that is the difference. The silence that followed was longer than any argument we had ever had. Brad looked at his coffee mug without drinking. I looked out the window toward the yard. Brad kept trying to explain in the days that followed that it was unintentional, that he figured I would have said yes, that Ray genuinely needed help. I listened to each argument the way I listen to a fault in a system, not to validate it or dismiss it, but to understand what is underneath. And underneath was one thing. Brad had never thought of me as someone who needed to be asked. I was the dad who always says yes, the available resource, the fund from which you draw without a form. That is not a malice you debate. It is an assumption you correct with a paper signed before a notary. Wendy found out from Brad that same day. She called Carol, not me, and they talked for a long time. Carol told me afterward only one thing. Wendy knew Ray had the car and said nothing because she did not want a problem. That told me more than any explanation. She was not a participant through malice. She was a participant through silence, the kind that seems harmless until someone says out loud that it is not. I did not say anything particular to Wendy. She understands what changed without me explaining it. and I believe she also feels something close to relief. Ray did not appear at the next family gathering. Nobody explained why. Brad said he was busy. Wendy nodded without detail. I did not ask. Carol did not ask. We sat and ate, and in that absence of explanation, there was more honesty than in all the previous cookouts where Ray talked about the car with the easy familiarity of someone who considered it almost his. We were all looser without him, including Wendy, who that afternoon seemed less tense than usual. I ate looking at the yard through the window, and thought that silence is sometimes what remains when you remove what should not have been there. The Fusion is in the garage, and I drive it every day, the same as before all of this. Each morning when I press the key fob and the lights come on, I feel something that is not exactly pride, but which I recognize each time. It is the sensation that things are where they belong, and that is not a coincidence, but the result of having understood clearly what is acceptable and what is not. The car is not just a car. It is physical proof that a limit does not live in words, but in concrete decisions, in limited powers of attorney, in revised wills, in keys. Brad comes over for dinner every other Sunday. We talk more than we used to, not dramatically different, but with less space between sentences and fewer topics either of us carefully avoids. That tells me something important about what changed. When the limit is clear, the conversation can be honest. When nobody assumes access to what is not theirs, everyone can be what they actually are. Brad is a man who is not bad, but who learned that what is not said does not exist as a problem. It was not his fault he learned that, but it is his responsibility to learn it differently now. The revised will is not a punishment. I did not change it to hurt Brad or to prove I was angry. I changed it because a will must reflect reality. And the reality before the hallway included an assumption about Brad that the hallway proved false. An engineer who designs with incorrect data does not build badly out of malice. He builds badly because his data did not correspond to what was real. I updated the data. Brad remains the primary beneficiary of what I built in 38 years, but under conditions that make him a responsible steward, not a free-handed owner who can dispose of things as he sees fit. Carol said something one evening, weeks after all of it, that I have not forgotten. We were on the back porch with tea, and she said, almost without thinking, "You feel that the house breathes differently now, don't you?" I asked her what she meant. She said, "I don't know exactly. It's just easier to be here." I looked at her and thought about all the cookouts with Ray, his comments, Brad's decisions that were not his to make, the silent accumulation of concessions I had been making without fully noticing. And I thought, that is exactly it. Not the size of the house, the space that opens when you... There is something paradoxical about discovering at 68 something I should have understood much earlier. A limit is not coldness. A limit is not a failure of love. It is the sentence that says, "This is where I live. This is mine, and this is mine to decide about." That sentence, when shown in papers on a table, is not the end of the conversation, but its honest beginning. The only way two people can talk truthfully is when each knows where the other one starts. Brad and I talk better now. It is not always comfortable, but it is true, and true lasts longer than comfortable built on unspoken assumptions. Ray and I do not have the relationship we had. I did not exclude him from the family or forbid him from seeing Wendy. That is not my place. But I also did not return the situation to that uncomfortable normalcy where he arrived when it suited him and took what he needed. Every reduction in that pattern is not the result of my revenge. It is the result of that pattern having required my cooperation to function, and my simply stopping cooperating without any scene or statement. When you stop opening to what enters without invitation, the opening closes on its own with no drama. There is one thing I did not say to Brad that Saturday, though I could have. I could have laid out the full chronology, favor by favor, date by date, because I had it precise in my head. I did not, because that would have been a conversation about the past, and the past does not change. What I wanted was a conversation about the future, which still can. About what gets asked and what gets assumed from here forward. The past is evidence, not argument, and the evidence was already on the table in those papers. I only needed Brad to read it with his own eyes. I think sometimes about what would have happened if I had not been in that hallway. If I had gone for my jacket 5 minutes earlier, I would probably still be driving the Fusion without knowing that someone had planned to dispose of it without my knowledge. The pattern would have continued, favor by favor, until it became so normal that nobody questioned it, including me. That accidental moment in the hallway was not luck. It was a warning that arrived at the right time. The only thing I regret is not having had the clarity to see it coming in the smaller moments that preceded it. The Fusion still has good years ahead. I plan to keep driving it every day for as long as it makes sense. I do not keep it as a relic. I use it because it is a car, and cars are meant to be used. But every time I take out the keys and put them in the switch, there is a moment that has nothing to do with the engine or the destination. It is the moment in which I know those keys are mine, that they were mine every morning since I bought them, that nobody can take that knowledge away. That small and precise feeling of, Brad asked me recently, with an awkwardness that seemed genuine, whether we might ever talk about the will. I said yes, whenever he was ready. He asked whether the conditions might change. I told him yes, that everything could change depending on what happens from here forward. No promises, no threats, only the truth. The documents reflect the trust that exists right now, and trust is built or eroded over time through concrete decisions, not declared intentions. Brad listened in silence. Then he nodded. It was the first time in a long time I felt he was actually listening to me, and not just looking for the argument that would let him off the hook. I will leave you with a question that belongs not to me, but to you. How many times have you been standing somewhere and heard something that stopped you cold? Not a fight, just a sentence that told you everything about how you are seen. How many times have you understood in a single moment that someone was making decisions about your life as if it were their property? Because it is not easy to set that limit. It is not easy to tell your son he did not ask. It is not easy to go to an attorney. It is not easy to put the papers on the